I'm going to move straight away to Jeff and ask him to give his observations and comments on the discussion so far. Jeff.
Thanks a lot, Wendy, and thanks a lot for the invitation. I was also very pleased to read this document, and I was very impressed with it. It kind of brought back to me a lot of areas of my own work, and it just heightened some of those particularities, and I want to perhaps talk about that. But I'll start with, so congratulations to those who invested in it. I really think it's an important contribution about trying to think our way through the impact of our work and the relationship with conflict. And I'll talk from the point of view of practitioner primarily, and what it's meant. Spent many years in this field and struggled a bit with it. Struggled often and lost, as well as occasional minor successes. And I've the two anecdotes I want to use. The first one is a food delivery in a country in the Horn of Africa, where we brought the food some years ago, and it was a dry food distribution in a warehouse full of IDPs who were all severely malnourished. And by the way, they shouldn't have had dry food. They needed wet feeding, but we were desperate and we brought dry food because that's what you do. You do what you think is the best thing to do. And we brought it to a town outside the capital, because we were afraid of bringing it to the capital, that the insecurity in the capital would lead to violence and conflict. And what happened was that the food convoy, when it got to the warehouse, was attacked. The recipients of the food were killed and the food was stolen. And the team resigned on the spot and said, look, we can't anymore. It's impossible. It's impossible at a human and a moral level. We continued the operation. I stayed. We continued the operation, but it did leave a mark. And a number of years later, I took some time out, and I was living at home in Ireland, and I was very concerned about the unintended consequences of what we do, and studied. I tried to study at least what's the negative impact of what we do. I wasn't sure that we weren't forcing people to leave their homes. I wasn't sure we weren't forcing people to go back to fighting each other. I wasn't really sure like how you could balance all of that out. The conclusions of the research, but I think one would have to validate this kind of every decade or every year maybe, was that actually humanitarian assistance is so limited and so unpredictable that anybody investing in humanitarian assistance is unlikely to cause major disruption or negative consequences, because we are unpredictable, we come and go, we can't, we're not that much part of the infrastructure. As I said, I think that's always worth revalidating, and I think it leads me on to, I have 3 points, and the first one is about awareness, the second one is about how to be conflict neutral, and the third one is what does it mean for us in terms of field practice. A few years ago we were all brought through a process in our organisation to look at management and to look at ourselves as managers, and the lesson that I took away, and I suspect most of my peers took away, was that actually it is about one's self-awareness. It is about understanding oneself. Of course, it was pitched as a professional course, but in the end of the day, the moment you start looking at your own practices, you're immediately in the realm of your own behaviours and attitudes and values and styles, and that will have an impact. And that's quite a scary area to go to, and I found it quite scary, but I did it, absolutely. And I kind of, my first point is, I think at an individual level, but also at a field team level, we really need to be aware of our impact, which means we need to take time for us and for our teams and for ourselves just to understand what's down there, what's bringing us, why do we go and do this work, and what's in it for us, and we can't probably, I believe, do enough of that if we want to deal with the conflict in the society we're working in. Otherwise, we're missing a point. It is about power relationships. I believe the introduction of aid resources is about how one manages power relationships in society, because we're bringing elements and resources into a society that is struggling. It's struggling sometimes for survival. It's certainly struggling for the basic necessities. And, you know, as a child and as a parent, I know what that means. And I suspect I would be capable personally of doing terrible things to people in the interest of protecting those I love. So bringing food and healthcare and assistance and doing it as a foreign organisation, I think let's not think we don't have an impact on power. We do. We're very, very important. This is recognised in development, which is, of course, the bulk of overseas aid. In development, all development aid is very legitimate, and everybody accepts that development aid is tied to conditionalities. It's tied to political progress. It's tied to certain behaviours. No one has the slightest, well, people generally don't have that many doubts about that. On our side of the fence, which is the emergency side, of course, we fight tooth and nail. We are desperate to keep conditionalities out of it. If there are humanitarian needs, people must get fed, must get supported, life must be protected. Don't apply any conditionalities, but which seems to suggest that it is conflict neutral. Of course, it's not. It's not. We even have a bigger impact because we are bringing resources into an environment where people do have guns, do have weapons, and won't hesitate to use them, not because they're bad, because they're desperate. So I think we need to just accept that, kind of in that sense, development makes it explicit, and we are to some degree in denial of that impact, and we shouldn't necessarily be in denial. And so that independence of kind of donor conditionalities or political conditionalities doesn't mean that recipient communities won't use it. Recipient communities are very, very happy to use our resources and use our resources all the time to promote their cause. Very brief. My first mission was in Ethiopia in the early 80s, anyway, a long time ago. But I remember distributing food, and beside me, and the people who had come to receive the food had come from across. It was all women and children, which had at that time, Eritrean controlled the liberated territory of Eritrea. So the rebel-controlled territory of Eritrea, they crossed the mountains. The women and children, I was there with the Ethiopian administrator. The men couldn't come because they'd be arrested. And this guy, of course, I didn't speak a word of Amharic, and of course he's there saying, well, you know, I brought this food for all you people, and you go back across the mountain and you tell your men where it's coming from. Okay, it's a long time ago and I was a bit naive, but it takes place today. We, as an organisation, we've had recent successes after 30 years of trying in places like Libya and Syria. Public successes, quotable successes, but those successes come with a certain interest of communities. They don't come because we are such fantastic negotiators, although I'm sure we're brilliant negotiators too, but they come with a certain quid pro quo. Because aid is about quid pro quo, and we just need to be aware of it. I'm not saying that's not a cynical comment. We just need to factor it in. People have interests in our resources. Of course, they have interests in our resources because we have a message, and because if we look at our awareness, we're very, very credible, and we're very, very powerful. And I think it's one of the kind of it's part of our kind of culture in our sector where we don't recognise our own power because we don't think we should recognise it. We're just there to serve. Yes, we are there to serve, and we are there to protect and to assist, but we do carry a big punch that sometimes we're in slight denial about. Okay, point number 2, how do we try and ensure that our resources are conflict neutral? Very difficult. I'll go back to the power thing. In the middle of 2005, I was in Washington, and the Deputy Secretary of Defense had just been handed the Guantanamo file. I don't know, somebody had to carry it in the Department of Defense at the Pentagon. He took it, and he was he'd been to Guantanamo. He was under a lot of pressure from the media, and he said, yes, and the ICRC is there. But, going back to the power thing, as if to say, well, because the ICRC is there, or because NGO X or NGO Y is present in Somalia, Sudan, Colombia, Afghanistan, this seems to suggest that actually things are, if not okay, well on the way to okay. Well, clearly that's not the case. But I use the example because it illustrates how clients and others out there will use us, and he I can say it, I guess, we intervened, and he called, and the Deputy Secretary of Defence called and apologised that I didn't mean to, I didn't realise. So he didn't even realise that he was kind of exposing, in this case, our organisation. So what's the objective in order to be as conflict neutral as possible? It really is to understand the context and to make sure that aid gets to those who need it only and always. It sounds simple, but that is the exercise isn't more complicated, I believe, than that at one level. And my hypothesis is that local people know what the needs are, they know where the needs are. They do. They know what they are, they know where they are. They will not be in a strong position to criticize us. It's very difficult to criticize the guy who's coming to help. It's very difficult. People don't often do it, which means we need to be, I know I'm harping on about awareness, we do need to be very, I think we need to be aware, because people aren't going to come and say, by the way, you're getting it all wrong. Do you know that by feeding this village, the other village, and da-dee-da? Of course, people don't want to say that to you because it looks, you know, that looks suspicious, to say the least. It looks like someone is trying to kind of look after themselves. So, I kind of flag that one. That being said, I think everybody recognises the efforts of us, and I speak for myself, sometimes hapless foreigner who kind of wanders into these places trying to do the best thing and the right thing, but of course they see that we get it wrong. Of course they see we talk to the wrong guy, we do make the wrong decision. They'll carry it for us. They will carry it for us because they don't expect this. It's like in our villages, our communities where we live, we don't expect the newly arrived person from outside London or Europe to get it. We're pretty generous as people. I mean, we'll carry each other. So I think our mistakes are carried by local people, and we can trust and have confidence and lean on local people to do that. So what are the key activities for that conflict zero approach? My experience is to develop a network, to talk to everybody all day long. Particularly talk to the people who are our detractors. Our argument is the strongest argument on the planet. There isn't a human being alive who won't respond to a humanitarian problem because we're human. And detractors do respond to, it's not easy. I don't find it easy. I find it difficult, but I do it, and I'm kind of trying to be stubborn about it. Thirdly, I think the job of the leader is to ensure acceptance and accessibility. That's the job. That's what I consider the job to be, for the team to do their job. The fourth one is to document and to communicate inside teams. We can't ever communicate enough inside our own field team about developing awareness. The last one is to wait until we're ready. We do feel under pressure. We're right to feel under pressure, but we all can probably cite examples and point to examples where we've just gone too fast because we were under pressure. The needs were enormous. We wanted to respond, but we do expose people to vulnerabilities, and we do create cleavages, and then suddenly we wonder why it's not working. Well, it's probably not working because we didn't actually check who's holding the power, where's the power going, and what does it mean, and how much we're exposing our staff, particularly our local staff, to things. The better news on the last question, what does it all mean for field agency work? I think a lot of this work is done anyway. I really do. I think we do it. I think it is in our DNA. That's the way we respond in the field. We deal with this stuff, not in the formal way I think that John and Anne are talking about, but I think in the informal way we do it. So I think a lot of it is being done. And I think it's a question to formalise some of that, and to kind of establish the organisational priority that this is important, because it is about our security. It is about our security, and it is about knowing ourselves. And our security comes before anything. I mean, our agency, staff security. If we don't do it, and sorry to apologise for starting with a negative, if we don't, we are creating security risks for ourselves. I look at casualties in my teams I've worked with, colleagues, my organisation. Many, if you look back, you think, okay, maybe too fast, too quick, didn't quite get the analysis. You can also be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But if we don't understand the power relationship in community, and there's a use of force and use of violence, better to wait, better to wait. I think a vision of intervention is required, and that's more important than satisfying project goals or program goals, and cannot be compromised. Easy to say, much more difficult to do. It does affect morale issues in the team. If we don't get morale in the team right in the field, and I can speak for myself, I've been parts of teams where morale has been low. Nothing worse than a small team living together, working together, struggling together in a foreign environment that is not hanging together. It's pretty much as bad as it gets. It's misery. It's misery. So investing in the team is primary. The disconnect between the foreignness and the local, and they're just, we don't have much time, and I'm happy to afterwards elaborate. We've just opened an office in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. Probably many of you can tell I come from another part of that island, a different jurisdiction actually. But it's the first time in my career where I have an emotional engagement in a problem of violence. I can tell you I'm struggling. I'm struggling to have confidence in my own judgments. Now, I've been doing this stuff for a long time. But I'm there, and because I have an emotional engagement, not because I feel any. I mean, I feel sorry for violence. I don't have a political. I don't have a political agenda. It's an emotional agenda. I have difficulty to know how far to pitch it. What's the right thing to do? If I was in any other country in the world, I would kind of slightly, innocently, naively, perhaps spit it out. So I've kind of brought in international staff because I trust their judgment, and I'm not. That comment is just about the local foreign thing, which I've never encountered intellectually. Yes, now I have to deal with it, and it's not easy. So what are my final remarks are just the implications of what does it mean are getting the analysis right of what's happening, being aware, getting the analysis will always get us in the right direction. It doesn't mean we'll get it right, but at least we're not starting by going backwards and getting into a problem. Aligning our headquarters with our field, no substitute for having an entire organisation behind one narrative. There aren't two narratives, there's one narrative. The agreement on operation objectives, even if it takes time, the team has to agree. If the team doesn't agree, the chances of it working are lesser. Check out all the options, because there's always one that is probably a better one if we had the time to look at it. And be as self-critical as possible, and then repeat the whole exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff.